This is what Betty has mentioned already, and other requirements. Do I know all of the procedures, the different export certificates? And then particularly for food, for example, what are safety assurance programs and so on? I mentioned already the catalogs, so I'm not going into detail in this part. So next slide, please. So here, for food and beverage, I mentioned already, and I probably I turn to repeat myself, but it's very important to know, and Betty has mentioned this as well. Unlike the European system, China's market access is including the standardization system. It's highly regulated, and a lot of things are actually mandatory for companies. And particularly food conformity and compliance with import procedures should be prioritized for all businesses. This is super important. So besides the requirements on the left side, you see now a couple of steps which should be taken or also taken into consideration before you basically implement them. So first of all, you have to decide upon the model. This is what we introduced before. Then there is a huge second step with the registration of for importers and exporters. Whatever model you are choosing, whether traditional or China's cross-border e-commerce, you have to be registered in the registration system of imported food and cosmetics importers, exporters. So there are a lot of other things as well you have to take into consideration in step 2. Step 3 actually is the documentation, preparation and requirements. So you have to submit before shipping actually products. You have to submit a proper documentation information about quality, quarantine origin, and so on. And you need a lot of other documents, like, for example, commercial invoice, bill of lading, then country of origin, I mentioned already. And so there is a whole lot of documents, which I referred already to the market access database, but also in all of the guidelines and reports of the EU SME Center, you will find much more information to that. Very important in step 4 is the labeling. All labels must be approved by the CIQ, the Chinese Inspection and Quarantine. And those standards are also subject to frequent change. So it is really advised to consult experts to ensure compliance, because we have seen this in the past. A lot of goods have been sent back because the label was wrong, and it's very difficult to correct this in China. Particularly for foodstuff, the label must, of course, provide the following information: the standard name, the list of ingredients, country of origin, and so on and so forth. Step 5, inspection and customs clearance. I think for the sake of time, I will not go into this. There might be also, I guess, a webinar on all of this. So the next slide, please. As I mentioned before, prepackaged food is was very popular in the past. Here on the left side, you see some examples like confectionery, pastry, or also beer. I hope you can see the figures, the 4 digits and the red line around it. So this is actually the HS code, which is the harmonized systems code available on the China Customs website. It's a 13-digit code. There was a change not a long time ago, and it's actually very helpful because it shows you everything about import and export tariffs, and it also will be a very vital and core part of the positive lists we have to look later when we are talking about cross-border e-commerce. And besides of the food safety law, and you see this in the middle, there are a lot of other administrative measures and regulations which are building the regulatory framework. And in terms of standards here, for example, for prepacked food, I mean, this is the easiest foodstuff you can import to China, just from a regulatory point of view. But you see already there are a lot of mandatory standards, for example, for food production, for additives, and also general safety requirements, for example, for packaging. The next slide, please. Another very popular good from from Europe is dairy. I think there was I think it was also mentioned yesterday in this online workshop. So there is still a high demand for imported milk, also despite COVID. I checked, so the market obviously has not suffered. And as I mentioned, EU countries are among the strongest and the biggest exporters currently. However, I mean, you know, milk and every dairy thing is like a high risk produce. So also in China, the how to say, the regulation is even tighter than for prepackaged food. So here you do not only to check for all of the different standards, but you also have like bilateral agreements or protocols. So this means your country and China, they have to negotiate for a particular product. They have to negotiate a protocol. And then the next step will be also that the China inspectors will come and they will check your premises. They will see that everything goes all right. And there is a couple of more documents you also need to have. Plus, again, I mentioned already there are more registrations. Importers, for example, they have to set up a sales record in the sales record system, where they put a lot of details as well. And then very how to say, to explain is also the label. So everything in terms of labeling is also very particular, and there has to be mandatory information on the label. And it's also recommended, besides like product name, ingredients, and so on and so forth, to put also other information on it, like batch number or method of preparation, and so on and so forth. So the next slide, please. Yeah, other consumer products besides F&B are like, for example, cosmetics or toys and so on, or electrical products. And here you see something that Betty has also referred to already. The EU manufacturer has to take into consideration the China market access scheme. So in a lot of cases, you will have a compulsory certification besides the Chinese standards, which are mandatory, and you have to fulfill a conformity assessment. So from the different requirements, basically we go in the next slide to the step-by-step compliance. And here you see, and it's outlined, I think, in a couple of guidelines of the EU SME Center as well. You really have to check the different steps. So what is the category my product falls under? Is it under the scope of the product safety law? Also like certifications, what are the tests? And are there voluntary certifications as well, and also labeling schemes? And then of course documentation, again, also a big issue. Let me say something to the product safety law, because this is really, really important besides all of the other laws. So it applies to all products which are processed or manufactured for sale. And the emphasis is really on standards to keep the product safety, but then also to really avoid unreasonable threat to health and personal safety. I will, we show the next slide, please. So something which is highly regulated, it is also a very popular consumer product coming from Europe, is cosmetics. So what you can see here, we have like a division between special cosmetics and general cosmetics. And so basically, more or less, for some of those, cosmetic products, there is an additional filing or registration necessary. And then I think there was the cosmetics guideline has just changed for the beginning now of this year. So now it's called Cosmetics Supervision and Administration Regulation. It will ensure that manufacturers are meeting the good manufacturing practices, the GMP requirements, and that all submitted documents for the cosmetic registration or filing are true and valid. So I did hear that I think what is in the discussion since very many years, I remember this very well from my time when I was working in the EUMA Center, was the animal testing. So I think now with this regulation, where we will get the final instructions, I think in May, I did read somewhere, basically European exporters for general cosmetics, actually, if they qualify for the exemptions and providing a GMP certificate, plus other safety assessment documentations, they may be exempt from like animal testing in China. However, I think I did read now that the French cosmetic industry is actually the first one that complies with all of this. However, I also did hear from companies that one of the issues is that in a lot of countries, actually, the Ministry of Health is not involved in all of this. So it's done by associations, and this might not be recognized by the Chinese authorities. So this is the thing probably which gets clearer when the final instructions are getting released in May. So the next slide, please. Yeah, so other consumer products besides cosmetics, it has been mentioned, electrical ones, toys are very popular. So here I just would like briefly to introduce the China compulsory certification. Maybe you show the next slide, please, about the process. Yeah. So this is the famous CCC. China compulsory certification is a pre-market approval scheme. So it has to apply to all products and systems, both imported and domestically manufactured. So this is nothing China wants to torture us. Everybody has actually to have it. And it is to basically prevent health and safety risks. So all of those products have to undergo a strict inspection, testing, and certification procedure, where you can see here the different steps. So more or less for the CCC standard procedure, there is a catalog. I think currently it's 17 product groups and 103 items. You have to check the catalog, and then you have to see together with a third-party provider who is also registered in China and probably also in your home country to help you to get through all of this, from the submission of the application via factory inspection and then also getting a CCC mark for your products. Very recently, China has relaxed a bit the CCC. So you have the CCC self-declaration. This is the process below. So basically, the big change is that there is no factory inspection required. However, also very important, there has to be a Chinese entity that has to submit the application, and the manufacturer has to make sure that the China standards are applied. The manufacturer has to talk with the test lab to define the test requirements. And so the manufacturer has one big responsibility, and the other one is actually the Chinese entity who is registering all of this. What has been already given as a feedback from companies is that one issue might be that the manufacturer has to inform the authorities about all product changes. And this might be an issue because there are always sometimes material changes or there are process changes. So this will be quite, how to say, this will have to manage an extra system to set up to actually inform the Chinese authorities about changes to not, how to say, to comply with the market. So the next slide, please. So this was it more or less, and then yeah, exactly. Thank you. This was it more or less like for the general trade or for the classic export. For cross-border e-commerce, so this actually cross-border e-commerce means that that's the process of buying overseas products directly from foreign retailers and suppliers via the internet. So you do not necessarily have to have an entity in China. CBEC, as it is called in China, became very popular recently, particularly for products requiring pre-market approval. And you have seen this, it's quite a challenge. However, the Chinese government in the past has closed the gaps, and all products, regardless whether they are entering the China via pilot or free trade zones, have to have like required certificates and documentation so that the products can be sold on the market. So, however, I think China has pushed for CBEC very much because they also, you remember, are pushing for consumption. So I think in the past year, currently they have added pilot zones and pilot cities where these special retail import policies are applying. So I think currently it's 86 pilot cities plus Hainan as a whole island, where those import policies are applied. And then maybe we can go to the next slide for exactly, because I think what is important to say here is that you remember from the beginning we were talking about points to consider. So if you consider, besides considering the general things, you also have to set up, if you would like to do cross-border e-commerce, an entry strategy. Yeah, and this cross-border e-commerce entrance strategy is not only driven by the food safety law or the product safety law, but it's also important by the e-commerce law. Yeah, so you see, this is an additional law to the whole framework. Because in the e-commerce law, the e-commerce law defines different e-commerce operators. You have platforms, you have providers, you have online sellers, which is also important because you have to get in touch with these platforms. And to just name three main ones is JD, it's Tmall, or the Little Red Book. Sorry. For the entrance strategy, of course, what you have to take into consideration is your company size and your products. So the big platforms might only work with the known and the big brands. And there are also specialized platforms with whom to work together, like Tmall Global, for example, is a comprehensive platform. You also might check for sales channels and marketing tools. So sometimes a store on WeChat, that's the equivalent to WhatsApp in China, is less costly, and you can test it out before you work with big platforms. But there is also the budget, which is, of course, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, a thing that you try to find creative ways in collaborations with like the key opinion leaders in China, so the influencers. From the regulatory aspect, I have to say, you have to start out finding the right pilot zone, and you have to be able to navigate the local rules and procedures, because what I said, the Chinese market is rapidly changing, and also the regulation. So you always have to keep an eye on policies and regulations. And again, as everything is heavily regulated, sometimes the regulations are also kept quite general and flexible. And this means that you really have to talk to the pilot zones as well. So, and then I think for the time, let's go to the, let me see here, to the last slide. Yeah, exactly, for the regulatory aspects. So actually, what you can see here is that that because food products that are imported through CBEC and are also supervised as personal articles, it doesn't mean that they are, how to say, that you don't have to comply to a certain extent. Yeah. So they still have to have the right ingredients. You cannot put in toxics. There might be sample inspections. You also have to inform your customer, and they're very important. You have to remind customers that they don't resell everything, because the label, for example, is also not in Chinese. So there are a lot of things you actually have to tell your customer, because don't forget, the punishment actually, if you do not comply, also in the CBEC, might end up to be in the social credit system, and this might have an impact on customs clearance, on whether you can import or not. And then I think the summary part, maybe quickly, and then I think we have it. So for the summary, the last slide, I recommend to talk to as many people as possible, to get familiar with the key elements of the system, the standards, as well as the other market requirements. Pay attention to the details of documentation. Keep in mind that you have to adapt probably your business strategy. Sometimes you can start with cross-border e-commerce, but at some point you might switch as well. Preparation work usually takes 3 times longer than expected. Again, as the market changes and the regulation changes, you also have to be quite flexible. And also, like, you need, if you want to export to China, you need expertise on the ground. And you have to work closely together with someone in China, it be an importer, an agent, or customs broker, or whatever, because the language, it's all in Chinese, and all of the documentation is in Chinese. For the standards, you also heard about Betty. So you need a local person that is required, even sometimes in a particular city where you would like to import. Yeah, so I think I try to be as quick as possible, and I also have provided some useful links at the end where you can have a look. The EU SME Center has the presentation, so thank you very much. And yeah, maybe I don't know whether we have time for questions. If not, then I guess the EU SME Center probably you can write, and then we can.
Yeah. Thank you, Martina, for your presentation. We are a bit late, but
yes.
we would still like to take some questions. But first, I would like to say that what you mentioned about cross-border e-commerce, in fact, from our experience at the USME Center, we see that many European companies choose this method as a way to let's say to avoid costly and lengthy procedures, especially for those product categories that require registrations, like dairy, like yogurt and baby formula, but also especially cosmetics and so on. I would we have a few questions, and the first couple of questions, I guess, are for Betty. The first one we see when talking about the Chinese standardization system, when enterprise standards appear, can we expect that sooner or later they will be converted, transposed into government ones? And the second question, since it's still for you, I will read it. Regarding the priorities of the CESAC project, is it planned to implement generic essentials requirements such as safety, EMC, radio, energy efficiency that are common to all manufacturers? Yes.
Thank you, Alessio, and thank you for the questions. First, whether the enterprise standards can become a government-led standards sooner or later. So the answer is that the enterprise standards and government-led national sector standards are in totally different category. So only if the enterprises propose their standards to certain technical committee, follow the procedures of standards drafting, then can the enterprises standards become a national or sector or local standards. So the procedure is similar like any other national standards. You make a project proposal and you submit to the technical committee, and technical committee make comments, voting, and then it will become a sector or national government-led standards. So this is the first question. The second question, my answer is that we have been always focused on the essential and generic requirements for EMC safety, but we did not mention that in our priority list because we basically make it combine it with market access and technical barrier to trade, TBT, because most of the safety and generic requirements or essential requirements belong to mandatory standards, and also it need to be reported to the WTO for TBT. So we always are taking care of that to see whether they are in line with the IEC and ISO, whether they are in line with European standards requirements. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Betty. We have another question, probably for Martina, on the product safety law. It requires Chinese language on product and OM, but most manufacturers don't fulfill these obligations, and it seems to be never controlled. Is it expected to be any change soon?
Do I understand? Yeah, thank you for the question. In terms of language, as I said, the Chinese, the product safety law is something which will be further developed, first of all. In terms of like language, of course, it will be in Chinese, and all of the, translations will be unofficial. And again, I think from what I have seen, because I have worked in a CCC agency for a while, the CCC certification is quite a strict. It's quite a strict thing, and you really have to comply to the product safety law. Yeah, and this is for domestic manufacturers as well as for everybody who is exporting or importing in China.
Thank you, Martina. Next question regarding standards and compliance. What are the most important differences between the export of consumer goods and industrial goods like machine parts or electric components? I don't know if, tough question, I guess. I don't know who wants to take it, Martina or Betty. Betty, you want to take it? Most important difference between consumer and industrial products.
Okay. My feeling is there are not much difference. It's you have to check whether you fulfill the different requirements. But basically, but it needs to know. It was noting that the consumer products are always or often covered by CCC, which are stricter compared to industry products. Some industry big scale products or industry specific products may not need such strict certification scheme. So maybe this is a requirement. But however, if the industry products are covered by some other law, for example, the workplace safety law or human protection safety requirements or any other industry products regulations, the products also need to fulfill that requirements. So it really depends on what kind of products are you ship or exporting to China. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. I would go with the last question that we have received, but of course, if there are other questions, I see that there are also other questions. We're going to reply to your questions tomorrow or in the next days, because now for time reasons we can't, but we're going to reply to your questions by email. Also, if there are other questions, please write them in the chat or in the Q&A part and we will reply. The last question that I have here is, should the producers, sellers of melt-blown for masks be registered and be on a list approved by the Chinese institution? Maybe this is Betty for you. This is the question. Should the producers, sellers of mask blown for masks be registered?
Do you mean the I don't know, is this a raw material? If it is a mechanical material, you have to fulfill the chemical. If it is a chemical materials, some raw materials, chemical raw materials, you have to fulfill the chemical importing regulation, and it requires to list on the. But if it's a if it is already semi material and it's just a wait for the final step, it can be regarded as a industry products. So it really depends on what kind of products are they? Are they purely raw chemical material? Yeah, Martina, do you have something to add?
No, I think that's correct. I mean, the past two questions, it's correct. It really depends on the product, what it is, whether it's finished or semi-finished. Then you have to look into this. No, thank you.
Thank you, Bessie. Thank you, Martina. There are a few other questions in the chat, but we are a bit late, so I will not respond, but we'll respond by email. How to find the right standard to develop my product and how to develop the best distribution channel. We are going to reply by email. We have your email addresses from the registration list, so please check your email. Very last point, we would appreciate your feedback. I mentioned that we're going to plan a few other webinars within the next months on specific focusing on specific industries. Could be chemicals, could be medical devices, cosmetics. But if you have any requests, you can submit these requests to us through the survey that you have here. You have a QR code here, but we're also going to send it by email tomorrow or next Monday. So if you have any suggestions, if you want to have a specific training, let us know, because we have to organize around 50 trainings, so we have plenty of resources to do it. So I would I would thank you, Betty and Martina, for your excellent presentations. I see also a lot of positive feedback in the chat, and I thank all the participants on behalf of the SME Center and the Italian Chamber of Commerce who has co-organized this webinar. If you have any questions, again, please do not hesitate to write to us. We provide free technical assistance free of charge. We have in-house and external experts that provide also specific assistance, also standards, technical issues, and of course also Betty and the CESEC project are a very, very useful resource to use for European research, for European companies. So thank you very much, and it was a pleasure, and hope to see you next time. Follow us on your social media to know about our upcoming activities. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Martina.